Darkness has control here. It presses against his eyes like something wet, something alive. The air tastes of cedar and resin and something else. Something that shouldn't exist inside a god's lungs, his own breath. Osiris tries to move. His shoulders meet wood. His knees meet wood. His forehead, when he lifts it, meets wood so close he can feel the grain pressing patterns into divine skin. The heat has nowhere to go. It builds in layers. His exhale, then the echo of his exhale, then the memory of both settling against his face like a burial shroud. He pushes. The ceiling doesn't move. He commands it to open, speaks the old words, the ones that parted rivers and called grain from barren soil. His divine essence flares through his limbs, bright and absolute. Nothing changes. The wood holds, the darkness holds, and somewhere in the stillness, a stillness so thick he can hear it humming against his ears, Osiris becomes aware of his own heartbeat. Loud, growing louder. The only measure of time in a place where time has stopped mattering. The coffin fits him perfectly. Every curve, every angle, every sacred proportion of his form matched exactly, as though someone had studied him, as though someone had planned. This is mythology uncovered, and this is Osiris. A god who ruled over the living, who carried immortality like a birthright, who never once imagined that forever had a seam. Immortality is not a fact, it is an assumption. And in the darkness of a box built just for him, Osiris becomes the first god to feel it tear. Long before the coffin, long before the silence, there was a world shaped by Osiris's footsteps. The Nile rose when Osiris walked its banks, not metaphorically. The waters responded to his presence the way muscles respond to thought. Instinctive, immediate, faithful. He taught humanity to read the river's moods, to plant when the floods receded, to store grain against the lean seasons. Before Osiris, people survived. After him, they built. Temple reliefs from the Old Kingdom show him standing among farmers, not above them. His hands are open, his crown sits easy. In every image, the crops behind him grow so thick, the artists had to carve them in layers. Wheat overlapping wheat, abundance spilling past the borders of the stone itself. The inscriptions call him "He who makes green the two banks." They call him Lord of Silence and the eternally good being. They do not mention his brother. Set appears in the margins of these early carvings, a figure half turned away, his face unfinished or deliberately obscured. Scholars have debated whether this was artistic convention or something else. A reluctance, a warning the carvers couldn't speak aloud. In the courts of the divine, Osiris ruled with a gentleness that looked like strength. He settled disputes between gods with patience. He offered Set dominion over the desert lands, the red places, the harsh places, and called it honor. "The kingdom needs your fire," Osiris told him once, in a conversation preserved across 3 fragmentary coffin texts. "Green things grow, but they cannot protect themselves. That's what you're for." Set's response is recorded only as silence. Those who watched them together would later speak of small things. A toast. Set held a moment too long before drinking. A laugh that arrived after the others had already stopped. Thunder rolling across the delta on mornings when the sky held nothing but blue. Osiris noticed none of it. How could he? He had built a world where trust was the foundation and betrayal was architecturally impossible. His peace was so complete, it became a kind of blindness. The inability to see threat in a place he had made safe. The pyramid texts would later call this era the time before the trembling. Historians would call it a golden age. Neither phrase captures what it actually was. a system so perfect it had forgotten how to imagine its own collapse. And this was the last day Osiris would see the world clearly. The fracture began with a gift. Set brought Osiris a jackal pup from the desert territories, black-furred, amber-eyed, too young to survive without its mother. He presented it during a feast, kneeling before his brother's throne, with a humility that made the assembled gods shift in their seats. "From the Red Lands," Set said. "So you remember that not everything beyond the green is barren." Osiris accepted it with both hands. He smiled, the same smile he offered farmers and suppliants, genuine and unguarded. "You honor me, brother. I'll raise it as my own." Set's jaw tightened, a movement so slight it could have been a trick of the torchlight. "I knew you would." The pup would grow to follow Anubis, not Osiris. But that night, Osiris saw only the gesture, only the kneeling, only the brother he believed was finally finding his place in the order of things. Across the hall, Thoth's reed stopped mid-stroke. A drop of ink bled into the papyrus, spreading like a stain. He did not resume writing. In the weeks that followed, Set's presence at court became more frequent. He attended councils he'd always avoided. He laughed at Osiris's judgments, nodded at his decisions, stood closer than he ever had before. When Osiris divided new territories among the gods, Set accepted his portion without complaint. A strip of borderland, barely fertile, prone to sandstorms. "You could have asked for more," Osiris told him privately. "I would have given it." Set tilted his head. His eyes held something Osiris couldn't read. Not anger, not gratitude, not anything with a name. "Would you? You're my brother." "Yes." Set smiled. The expression fit his face like borrowed clothing. "I keep forgetting. That means something to you." Osiris heard affection. He heard a man learning to trust. He reached out and gripped Set's shoulder, a gesture of equals, of family, of bonds that couldn't be broken. Isis watched from across the chamber. Her hand found the wall, steadying herself against something she couldn't name. When Osiris looked to her for approval, she glanced away. Anubis, still young then, stood in the doorway with the jackal pup pressed against his chest. He did not enter. Later, he would say he hadn't known why. Only that his legs refused to carry him forward, as if the room itself had told him to stay back. The feast was announced 3 days later, a celebration of Set's loyalty. A gift, Osiris declared, for a brother who had finally come home. Osiris wouldn't recognize betrayal even when it stood at his side. The feast was too beautiful. Lotus blossoms floated in bronze basins, their perfume thickening the air until it felt like breathing through honey. Torches burned in colors that shouldn't exist. Set had commissioned flames, dyed with minerals from the deep desert. Reds and golds that painted the walls like the inside of a wound. Musicians played from behind silk screens, their melodies layered and complex, designed to fill every silence before it could form. The gods reclined on cushions stuffed with ibis down. They drank wine the color of garnets. They laughed too loudly, moved too loosely, as though the atmosphere itself had untethered something in them. Nephthys sat apart, her fingers wrapped around a cup she never raised to her lips. Isis arrived late and stood near the door, her eyes tracking Set as he moved through the room, touching shoulders, refilling goblets, playing host with a grace no one had seen from him before. Set had never hosted anything. The coffin arrived at the feast's peak, carried by 72 attendants who moved in perfect unison. They set it in the center of the hall and stepped back without a word, without looking at it, without looking at anyone. It was magnificent. Cedar from the mountains beyond the eastern sea. Gold inlay tracing patterns that shifted when you stared too long. Protective symbols, or something pretending to be. The craftsmanship was impossible. Every joint invisible, every surface polished until it held reflections like water. The proportions were divine, literally divine, calculated to match the sacred geometries reserved for gods alone. "A game," Set announced, his voice cutting through the music. The instruments faltered, then stopped. Whoever fits inside perfectly may keep it as their own. Gods rose from their cushions, curious, wine-warm, eager for novelty. One by one they tried. Too tall, too broad, too narrow in the shoulders. They laughed at each failure, treating it as entertainment, as Set surely intended. Osiris watched from his seat. The coffin was beautiful. He could admit that. But something in its beauty made his stomach tighten. The way it caught the firelight, the way it waited in the center of the room, like a held breath. "Brother." Set's voice, closer now, at his shoulder. "You haven't tried. I have coffins enough, but none like this." Set's hand found his arm, warm, steady, familiar. "I had it made for a king. Who else should test it?" The room turned toward him, expectant, smiling. Thoth had not attended. Anubis had not attended. Isis stood frozen by the door, her lips parting around a word she didn't speak. Osiris rose. Later, some would say they saw him hesitate at the coffin's edge, a pause so brief it barely existed, his hand resting on the gold-traced rim, his eyes dropping to the silk lining inside. White silk, soft as cloud, shaped exactly like the hollow of a body. His body. He knew. Some part of him knew. But knowing is not the same as believing. And Osiris had spent eternity in a world where his brother knelt and offered gifts and called him king. He trusted the way he breathed, without thinking, without choosing. He stepped inside. The silk embraced him. The cedar walls rose around his shoulders, his hips, his feet, every inch of him cradled in perfect alignment. He looked up at the ceiling of the box. It bore his face, painted in gold leaf, smiling. Set appeared above him, blotting out the torchlight. His expression held nothing. No triumph, no hatred, just stillness, vast and absolute, like the desert at noon. "It fits," Set said. The lid came down like a verdict. Darkness, a slam that shook his teeth, then the sound of molten lead pouring, hissing against the seams, sealing every edge, filling the world with the smell of burning metal. Osiris pushed. The lid didn't move. He commanded it to open. The words that had never failed, the authority that had shaped nations. His divine essence erupted through his limbs, bright enough that he should have seen it through his own closed eyes. Nothing. The wood held. The lid held. The darkness held him like a fist. His breath came back at him, hot and damp. His heartbeat filled the space, pounding against the walls, against the silk, against the painted smile inches above his face. The air was already thinning. He could taste it, the way each inhale returned less than the one before. The coffin moved, lifting, tilting. The sensation of being carried, 72 sets of footsteps, synchronized and unhurried, bearing him somewhere he couldn't see. Then falling. A rush of gravity and a sound like thunder, and suddenly water surrounded him. Not inside, not yet, but pressing against the coffin's walls, seeping cold through seams the lid hadn't fully closed. The Nile. They had thrown him into the Nile. He felt the current take him. Slow at first, almost gentle, the coffin rocking like a cradle. Through the wood, impossibly distant, he heard music resuming. Laughter. The feast continuing without pause, as though the guest of honor had simply stepped outside for air. The water sloshed against Cedar. The darkness pressed inward. His chest heaved against nothing. Breath that found no purchase. Lungs that burned with heat and absence. He clawed at the lid until his fingers split. Divine blood, golden and thick, pooled beneath his nails and went nowhere. Time stopped meaning anything. There was only the rocking, the heat, the heartbeat growing fainter like a drum retreating down a long corridor. The ceiling with his own face smiling down at him, patient and permanent, waiting for him to understand what he'd become. The first god to feel his edges. The first god to meet a wall he couldn't command. The first god to learn that immortality was never a promise, only a silence where death hadn't yet spoken. Above the river, the feast burned on. Set accepted congratulations. Nephthys wept in a corner no one visited. Isis had already vanished into the night, though no one noticed when. The Nile carried its cargo north, toward the sea, toward the foreign shores where fishermen would one day find a tree grown around a box they couldn't open. But that is another story. For now, there was only the water, the darkness, and a god learning to die by inches, alone in a masterpiece built just for him. The god who emerged from that coffin was not the god who entered it. When Isis finally found him, wrapped in the roots of a tamarisk tree on a foreign shore, his body preserved by something deeper than embalming, she saw what death had written on him. His skin had turned green, not the green of growing things, not the fertile black green of Nile mud, but the green of transformation itself. The color flesh becomes when life has left, but decay has not yet arrived. That threshold moment, that held breath between ending and whatever comes after. Every image of Osiris you've ever seen shows him this way. We call it a symbol of rebirth, of vegetation, of the eternal return of crops after flood. But the Egyptians knew what it actually meant. They had seen bodies change color. They understood that Osiris wore the hue of a corpse, learning to become something else. Not alive, not dead, but permanent in a way neither state could offer. On his head sat the Atef crown, white like Upper Egypt, flanked by ostrich feathers that represented truth and justice. Before the coffin, it marked sovereignty. After, it became something else entirely, the weight of judgment. A god who had crossed death's border now wore the authority to decide who else could pass. In his hands, crossed over his chest, he carried the crook and flail. Shepherding tools, threshing tools, instruments for guiding the lost and separating the worthy from the chaff. Living kings held them to show they could provide and protect. Osiris held them because he now ruled a kingdom where provision meant passage and protection meant remembering who you were when everything else had been stripped away. Here is the detail the temple paintings never explain. Osiris's skin was not green before he entered the coffin. He earned that color. He became the god of rebirth only after he had something to be reborn from. The symbols didn't describe him. They recorded what the darkness had made. Osiris wasn't destroyed. He transformed. And 4,000 years later, we're still responding to the same fears that killed him. Consider the coffin, the darkness, the tightening walls, the air that returns your own breath like a punishment. Claustrophobia isn't a modern invention. It's ancient machinery, survival coding, written so deep into the human brain that we react before we understand. Small spaces meant burial. Burial meant death. The body doesn't wait for the mind to reason through it. The body remembers. Osiris experienced what we still carry. That animal recognition when the walls press too close. That certainty beneath logic that some spaces are not meant for the living. The Egyptians understood this fear well enough to build entire theologies around it. Spells for opening the mouth, prayers for unblocking passages, rituals designed to ensure the dead would never feel trapped again. They weren't just honoring Osiris, they were processing the same terror he'd discovered. Then there's the betrayal. Psychologists have a term for what happens when trust shatters completely. Betrayal trauma. It's different from other wounds. When a stranger harms you, the world becomes more dangerous. When family harms you, the self becomes less stable. The person you trusted wasn't just a person. They were part of how you understood reality. Osiris built his entire kingdom on the assumption that brotherhood meant safety. Set didn't just kill him, he collapsed the architecture of everything Osiris believed. We know this feeling. The friend who wasn't, the partner who lied. The moment you realize the ground you were standing on was never solid. Osiris's story survives because it names something we still struggle to articulate: the specific devastation of being wounded by someone who was supposed to be shelter. And then, the reinvention. Osiris emerged from death as a judge, not a king restored to his throne, not a warrior returned for vengeance, but something more precise: an authority over transitions, a keeper of thresholds. This is what humans do after catastrophe. We create systems. Courts after chaos. Laws after violation. Structures that say, this will never happen the same way again. Every society that has survived trauma builds its Osiris, a figure who stands at the border between what was and what comes next, ensuring that passage is earned and that the rules finally mean something. The Egyptians didn't worship death. They worshipped the one who made it navigable. We're still looking for the same thing. So why was Osiris the first god to die? Not because he was weak. His strength shaped civilizations. Not because he was foolish. His wisdom taught humanity to outlast famine and flood. Osiris died because he trusted completely. And complete trust has no immune system. It cannot recognize the wound until the blade is already inside. Immortality didn't fail because the universe found a flaw in divine architecture. It failed because Osiris never built walls against the one person he believed would never require them: his brother, his shadow. The silence that had been growing in the margins of every relief, every feast, every unanswered pause. Immortality cracks when trust blinds. That's the seam. That's what Set understood, and Osiris never learned, until the cedar pressed against his shoulders, and the darkness taught him what gods were never supposed to know. Somewhere tonight, the Nile still carries its memory. A box drifting through black water, a god breathing his last borrowed air, a silence settling over the river like the first page of a story that would never fully end. Osiris became the ruler of the dead because he had earned it the only way that mattered. He went first. But Osiris wasn't the only god to learn what waited in the darkness. There is another, one who faces death every single night, who descends into the same black waters and fights his way back through horrors that would break a lesser being. A god who refuses to stay dead. That story is coming. This has been Mythology Uncovered. Until next time, may your name be remembered and your heart weigh true.